I just want to talk about where this came from. So I was submitting a speaker proposal a number of years ago, and they were asking, to tell you a little bit about the work. And the way that I came to invest was that I stopped and I looked at all the counseling work that I do with girls and women, and I thought about what are the common denominators, what are the common themes and the common steps, and that's how Invest came to be. So it wasn't like I had the framework first and then I put people into it. It was working with the individuals and families and couples where this framework came to life. A bit about my approach. It's neurodiversity affirming. So as I said before, we really look at autism as a difference, not a deficit. We focus on people's strengths and what they can do and how we can build on those. It's person-centered, which means that each person I work with, they're getting a different approach. And that is because if you look at the research, individualized approaches are the most effective when it comes to autism, because you really want to custom design it to their way of learning and experiencing the world. I also have a variety of clinical techniques that I bring to my work. Solution-focused therapy, which is like a brief therapy model. CBT, or cognitive behavioral therapy, which is where we help people tune into and identify feelings. DBT, dialectical behavioral therapy, which is a skills-based model. And narrative therapy, which recognizes that individuals are experts in their own experience. So the first part of INVEST stands for identify needs. And what's most important is to hear from the individual themselves of what they want out of therapy. So I always ask, and this is actually part of our intake form, what brings you to therapy at this time? So in your own words, tell us why you're here. How important is this issue for you? We put on a scale of 1 to 10. This is a great indicator to see how relevant it is for them versus the question number 2, how important is this issue for the people in your life? So if someone says that it's a 7 important for them and a 9 for the people in their life, you know that this person's in counseling maybe for their parents or for their partner, but not necessarily for themselves. So you want to get a bit of buy-in for them about why they're there. Also part of the intake process, we ask, what have you already tried to do to improve the issue you're facing? And this is an important question because this goes back to resilience. I'm assuming that people are already working really hard to get through and to get by, and I want to be able to build on that. What do you hope to get out of therapy? So here we're exploring hopes and dreams, and how will you know if therapy has been helpful to you? This is where we're getting people to start to visualize this preferred future where they want to end up. And that's very important because if they can start to picture themselves doing the things they want to do, then we can try to help get them there. Some of the top reasons for seeking service are, number 1, to understand my neurodivergence. And this comes up because we do see a lot of people who are showing up later in life with a new diagnosis. And when I say later in life, it could be still teens and 20-something, but all the way up to 70s, wanting to understand what autism actually means for them. They want to improve their mental health, enhance their social skills, strengthen relationships with the people in their life, or maybe new people, work on their executive functioning techniques, increase life skills and independence skills. This is a big one just in terms of helping people break things down and think about where are they at and where do they want to be and what do they need to do to get there and what are the barriers that are getting in the way. Understanding sensory processing. I'm not an OT, and I know that occupational therapists really specialize in sensory processing, but we can give tips and tricks and get people to understand how they experience the world that way. Emotional regulation, work and school performance, how to advocate for themselves in different settings, and how to navigate institutions, as we mentioned before, like medical situations or post-secondary. I always ask this question, and this is really cool now that we're doing actually all of our work virtually. How do you learn best? So is it visually? If it is, I'm going to be doing mind mapping. I'm going to put up the whiteboard. I'm going to be putting a chronology of their trauma and understanding why it happened so they can understand it visually. If it's auditorily, I'm not going to do any of that stuff. We're just going to talk. If they need time to talk out their experience in order to understand it, we're going to make sure they have lots of airtime. I'm doing a lot of listening in those sessions. Maybe they need to write it out in order to understand it, so they're taking notes during the session. Some people say they need additional time to process new information. And so we'll say, okay, why don't we pause here and just take some time to write some notes down, reflect on what we talked about, and see if you have any questions. And we sit silently in therapy for a couple minutes while they take some time to integrate what we've talked about. And what usually happens is a lot of really interesting reflections. Oh, yeah, I was just thinking about this and that, which wouldn't have happened if we didn't pause. And some people don't know how they learn best, and so we try to figure that out in our work together, or we do a combination of strategies, and then we say which one was best for you. The therapy that is the most useful, I find, are the people who show up with a list of things that they want to cover that day. I love it. Makes my life a little bit easier, but it also means they're focused, they're motivated, they're taking initiative, and that this is really important to them. If someone doesn't show up with a list of things they want to talk about, we say, what do you want to focus on today? If that's too broad a term, I'll often say, last time we talked about issues with your family, understanding your diagnosis. Do you want to continue talking about that today? Or would you like to talk about issues at work or issues so I'll pull out different areas of their life and bring it to them, because sometimes that open-ended initial part of the therapy experience is really hard for them to articulate. It's really important to ask, is this something you want to explore further? And the reason I say this is I can't tell you until I learned how many times people would start talking about something and they just keep talking about it, and I'd engage with them, we'd be talking, and then towards the end of the session, I'd say, so we have 5 minutes left. It's like, oh, I didn't get to talk about this. I was like, why didn't you say anything? But they struggle to interject, they struggle to guide the conversation. It's not really their job, it's my job. So I always check in now when people start on a topic. I'll say, okay, well, you're talking now about your friendship with Barb. Is that what you want to focus on today, or is there something else? So you have to really work as, to really direct and redirect the dialogue. When you're working with families and partners, oftentimes you'll notice that people are coming at things from different places and different perspectives. So the first thing you want to do is identify what are some of the shared goals between the people who are showing up today. And then you acknowledge the differences. Okay, so Tammy really wants to help Abigail with her homework and try to reduce meltdowns. And Phil, you really think that it's best if she can just figure it out by herself. But both of you want her to figure out how to do her homework. Right? So you want to acknowledge the differences. You want to talk about the work that has already been done. Again, pointing back to resilience. This family has worked hard on this already, so let's try to figure it out. What have they already done that works? What have they done that doesn't work? And the stuff that has worked before, we always want to build on that. And look for evidence of common goals or common priority areas. Because oftentimes, even if people are saying different things, they want the same thing. And then make a plan so that we're all on the same page together. So far we've identified needs. And before we move on, I want to say that identify needs is an ongoing process. It's not like the first time you meet with them, you identify needs and then it's done. Throughout your work with individuals and with families, new issues come up. So you always want to identify priority areas and make sure that you're focused on those areas as well. And one thing that I've noticed in my work, some of the clients I work with are quite long-term. And that doesn't mean that they're not growing and shifting. It's actually quite the opposite. So when we first met together, maybe they were just working on trying to cope with anxiety and trying to show up to work. And then they learned how to cope with the anxiety and show up to work, but now they want to actually excel in their job a little bit. And they want to learn how to interact more with their coworkers. And then they learn how to interact with their coworkers, and they want to make friendships outside of work, right? So it's almost like a stepping stone process that takes place when you're working with autistic individuals. So as I mentioned, the V stands for validate. And this is very important because most autistic individuals have been invalidated from a young age, being told that who they are is not okay. And this creates deep-seated shame within them, which can have impacts on mental health and physical health. So if we're talking about what validation is, we can also talk about what validation isn't. So emotional invalidation is when a person's thoughts and feelings are rejected, ignored, or judged. Oh, you're so sensitive, get over it. You're such a drama queen. Come on, let's go, we gotta go, stop crying, we gotta get out of the house, come on. We can do this intentionally or unintentionally. But either way, it can be very painful. And it makes the person feel neither seen nor heard. This is a quote that I took from one of the assessment reports from one of the people we're going to talk about with the case studies. And unfortunately, and I don't mean to pit myself against other professionals, but a lot of documentation that is written about autistic people is incredibly invalidating. So this was written about an adult woman that I work with who's quite lovely, honestly. Friendly, lovely, but I guess it's because I see her when she feels calm and safe and relaxed, so I get to see that side of her. And when she was going for her autism assessment, certainly he didn't see that. The respondent's interpersonal style seems best characterized as being cold and unfeeling. Others likely see her as stern, punitive, and unable to display affection or make a commitment to personal relationships. She has many friends. At times, she may appear almost devoid of warmth and friendliness, and she likely has a propensity to make others around her feel uncomfortable and uneasy. Can you imagine someone talking about you that way? And let alone someone you paid $3,500 to do your assessment? And how is this helpful for the person to hear this about themselves? So the way we conceptualize autism is through an invalidating lens. We think of autistic people as what they're missing in terms of neurotypical people, as opposed to just individuals themselves with their own strengths and sets of challenges and difficulties. But this is something we can change. So everybody who's here today and everyone who's listening at home, we can think about the types of language we use when we're talking to people, especially autistic people, and try to be validating and confirming and focusing on strengths and not on terrible deficits and differences. So validation is a way to communicate that the relationship is important and solid, even if you disagree. That second part is very, very important. It's not about saying yes all the time to things. It's about acknowledging that you care about the person, and you might have a different opinion. It's a recognition that another person's thoughts, feelings, sensations, and behaviors are understandable. So I have to say that one of the phrases I say a lot in my work is, it makes sense that you feel that way because. And even them hearing that, I'm saying it, it's giving me chills because people don't say that to autistic people. They say the way you're behaving makes no sense, right? But it does make sense. There is a reason why they are behaving that way. There is a reason why they feel that way. And being able to offer that to them is a really wonderful thing to be able to share. I'm going to just put a clip of the movie Inside Out. For those of you who have seen it, this is where there's a girl named Riley, and she's moving, and we get to know all the different emotions inside her system and what they're trying to tell her and how they guide her. And we're in this video, we're going to watch her imaginary friend, Bing Bong, lose his rocket, and the different ways that her emotions try to console her. And when you're watching it, think about if you recognize yourself and the strategies that you use to try to console the people in your life when they're upset, whether it's students or children or your partner or a loved one. So how many of us, when we see someone upset, do we just want to make it go away, right? We want to fix it. Or maybe we can distract it with a little dance or a song. But what sadness shows us is that by just sitting with the person, with their emotions, that can make them feel seen and heard and validated. And oftentimes in my work, if someone is crying, I say something like, it's okay to cry. It's okay to be sad. And sometimes they feel like they need permission to express that emotion. So think about your own reactions and where they come from. A lot of us are uncomfortable with other people's distress. We want it to go away, as I mentioned. But the best thing you could actually do is to take your emotions in that moment and put them aside and realize that they're not helpful here right now. And just focus on the other person's emotions. So validation comes from a curious and compassionate approach. That sounds hard. Tell me more. So you want to be open. You want to be listening to what the person is saying. The message that's communicated is, I see you and I hear you and you matter. What was that like for you? And to try to rephrase it and ask it in a question to make sure that you got it right. So you're sad because so-and-so didn't want to come to the movies. Is that right? Okay. Now this might seem strange. You're saying, how can I enact this with an autistic person? How do I create this connection? And there's different ways for each person. For some, it's just a matter of sitting physically close, just knowing that you're in their presence can be enough. Oftentimes it's helpful to look in the same direction, but not looking at each other, because that can feel like the person feels watched or witnessed. And just be with them. You can ask them, not in their sadness or they're upset, because it's hard for them to talk, but to plan ahead so that the next time they get into that situation, what would you like me to do? What would be most helpful to you? And part of validation is to encourage passionate interests. We've talked about how passionate interests bring joy and purpose into a person's life. And they feel safe and familiar. It's an anchor for them when the rest of the world is swirling. It can help point them towards careers, but keep in mind that there can be a sense of loss when an interest fades. I was working with someone who loved to play the violin, and she got so much joy from it. And then one day she just kind of stopped. And she developed a sense of sadness, and it was hard to know, was it an abrupt stop because she was developing depression? Or was she feeling depressed because she lost the joy from her violin? But if a person's interests wane, this can create sadness. So be aware of that and maybe help them cultivate a new interest. There's also self-validation. This one feels super uncomfortable and foreign for most autistic girls and women, is being kind to oneself. So it's okay that didn't work out. Usually autistic girls and women have a propensity to be perfectionists, so when something doesn't work out, that can feel so painful. So to be kind, it's okay that didn't work out. To reassure yourself, I know this is hard and I will get through this. And some acceptance of limitations. And this one's also really difficult, but if I will feel better if I stop what I'm doing and take a break. And as I'll talk about more in the strengthened section, it's really important that there's downtime built into a day. Autistic people can't necessarily do the same schedules and the same amount as non-autistic people. And if you're a parent and you're trying to get your kid to do an extracurricular activity every day after school, stop. It's too much for them. They need downtime. They need to relax. So we've talked about identify needs and validate. Now we're going to talk about educate. I'm just going to switch folders. Nope. Okay. So educate is a 5-tier approach. The first and most important is to build self-awareness. I mentioned in part 1 about the sense of self being fragmented and confusing. This is the first step in trying to help this individual thrive, is to understand what kinds of environments are best for them, what kind of limits they need to set, what types of people are good for them, and how they can understand themselves better. Working with families and partners, you want to build communication strategies. You want them to understand autism and how it impacts their loved one. With the school, I'm going to get into all these in a little bit more detail. But with the school, you want to advocate for their needs and accommodations. And the same with employment. And in the community, if your family is really heavily involved in your church or in leisure activities, it's very important to educate the people involved about you or about your child so you can have the most enjoyable experience in those activities. So how do we build self-awareness? Is it even possible? And the answer is yes. I have found in my work, absolutely, people have built a stronger awareness of who they are, what they want, what they believe in, and how to advocate for it. One area of this is to understand their neurodivergent profile better. This came originally from an article on neuroclastic.com, which is the blog site for autistic bloggers. And I added the last column, emotional processing, because I thought it needed to be there as well. But oftentimes what we'll do is we'll break down their different experiences into these different columns so they can understand the different components of autism and how it affects them. So it's not just the DSM criteria, but looking at more specific areas like sensory processing or emotional processing or information processing. And looking under repetitive behaviors, that can be motor, such as stimming, as we talked about, or it can be cognitive, like insistence on sameness or repetitive and restricted interests. So usually what I'll do is we'll take this chart up and then we'll go through it with the individual or with the family, and we'll fill out each column so the person can understand themselves better and their autism diagnosis better. One area that was missing there is executive functioning, and I really like this visual. This is from advantageslearningcenter.com, and it breaks down executive functioning into 8 different components, which again, when you're breaking information down, that really helps people understand it better so they can then digest the information. If you say a term like executive functioning, it doesn't make sense to them. So one of the areas, I'll go through just a couple of them. Impulse control, so the ability to think before acting. A lot of the people that we work with, sometimes they're just doing before they're even thinking it through, but what are the consequences to this? So trying to make them aware of that and coming up with strategies. or flexible thinking, the ability to shift from one task to the next. And how can you come up with strategies to shift your thinking or your behavior in that way? Or planning and prioritizing. So if you have a goal, how do you break it down into the different steps, and when are you going to do those steps, and how do you think you're going to feel once you accomplish those steps? Task initiation is a really tough one for people just to get started on things, and I think this is also magnified by anxiety, because there's often this perfectionism layer. So first of all, it's just hard from an executive function point of view. I always think of it as that pull-back car where you have to pull it back a bunch of times and then you release it and then the car goes. But if you have anxiety about you wanting to be perfect, and it's better to just not try at all or not do it at all than to not be perfect. And this comes up very often. One of the key ways to build self-awareness is to give language to experience. If you think about the quote, "I think, therefore I am," the ability to put your experiences into words allows you to understand your experiences better. And using the case studies, I'm going to go through different tools that I use to help people identify their feelings, recognize personality traits in others so they can make better choices with friends and partners, and values exercises so they can live more in line with their values. They can be more aware of what's important to them and how they can find that in life and achieve that. I always talk about anxiety with my clients because it's just a common experience with autistic people to have a higher level of base level anxiety compared to neurotypical people. So even when they start the day, they're waking up, they might have a level of anxiety that's always present, and they're always sort of trying to fight against it. So in this circle, we have what anxiety might look like. And anxiety presents differently in different people. From a physiological point of view, it might be a racing heart, might be a squeeze in the chest. It might be that a person is pacing to try to get that excess energy out, or a restlessness. It might be increased sensory sensitivity when you're feeling anxious. You're much more aware, hyper alert of your surroundings. Or you might feel nauseous. So many clients wake up and feel nauseous in the morning before they go to school because they're already dreading what's to come that day. Rumination is very common. So rumination is just thinking about either bad things that have happened or predicting the bad things are going to happen and just getting caught in a thought loop, a negative thought loop, and really having a hard time breaking out of it. And we see avoidance as a common strategy. So just not doing the things that they need to do to make their lives better, even things that they really want to do, just because they're feeling anxious. Other behaviors are hair pulling, whether it's pulling out your eyebrows, trichotillomania, or pulling out your hair or your body hair, or skin picking is also common as well. What are some of the causes of anxiety for autistic people? Why do they have higher levels of anxiety than other people? I'm going to start with the bottom one, actually, feeling out of control. There's just this sense that there's an uncertainty about what's going to happen. I talked before about a diminished sense of agency, so feeling like life is happening to them as opposed to them being in control of their lives. Many women talk about, I can't believe I said that, so much anxiety over what they said in social situations, then having anxiety for what they didn't say and wish they said, so social anxiety. Anxiety about change, so not knowing what's going to happen, unexpected things taking place, not knowing what's expected of them. I've mentioned sensory as well. And this feeling of experiencing everything for the first time. This might sound strange, but for many autistic people, they don't know what to expect. It's like a black hole when they look out into the future. They might not be able to picture it, or there's something called predictive processing that I've been doing a lot of reading about that I'm trying to understand better. But the way that the autistic brain does predictive processing is different than the non-autistic brain. So an autistic person, when they're thinking about predictive processing, they want to create a prediction based on what they've experienced in the past. So when they think about the past, though, they're looking more about them and the events that they've experienced, as opposed to, like, in a lateral way, as opposed to in a deep way. I'm sorry I can't explain this fully. I'm still trying to understand it. But it's a way that's looking at the fact that when they encounter the present, they can't retrieve the memories that would help them do well to predict what's happening in the future. So I'm going to continue to learn about it. I hope you learn about it too. The term is predictive processing. What can help within families and partners? We want to educate about the double empathy problem. This is from Damien Milton, who's a researcher in the UK. He's autistic himself. And he said that in the past, we've always looked at communication difficulties as being seated in the autistic person. The autistic person doesn't have the theory of mind of the other person. The autistic person doesn't know how to read the other person. But what he's saying is, well, the non-autistic person doesn't understand the autistic mind and doesn't know what the autistic person is thinking and feeling and perceiving. So when you're working with families and partners, it's important to try to find some common ground that way, that the blame is not situated in the autistic individual, that it's something that can be built upon the understanding from both sides, and that both partners or families need to lean in towards each other to understand their perspectives instead of lean out. You also want to understand the why behind behaviors. I know in couples that I've worked with, there ended up being like a lot of chasing behavior where there was a fight and then one of the partners would try to get away because she didn't want to act out in front of the other partner. But the other partner felt abandoned, and so she was chasing after her. And so it just became this sort of cat and mouse game. And they didn't understand why the other person was behaving that way. So to look at the underlying reasons behind behavior can really help build compassion and understanding within couples and families. You want to enhance communication. I mentioned before, so eye-to-eye contact can be difficult. So parallel activities like baking side by side, going for walks, going for car rides, doing things that are low-stress activities together can really help enhance communication between family members. And to teach validation. When I was working with a family with the young adult woman, she's living at home, and her parents are highly invalidating about who she is and her autism. And I showed her the video, and I showed her some slides, and she said, oh, my dad would never agree to that. Right? So the idea that learning about validation, it's not comfortable for people. It might not be their go-to. So people really have to be invested in learning how to engage with each other in a different way and unlearn habits and behaviors and patterns that you've developed over the years. In the community, knowing your rights is very important, knowing what the Human Rights Code is, knowing that you can advocate for your needs without disclosing your diagnosis. Understand what is available to you in the school system, as an example, to make sure that your child can thrive, so that you can create environments that are both enjoyable and effective and productive for your young person or for yourself. Oh, sorry. The S in invest stands for strengthen. And one of the first areas we want to strengthen are routines and strengthening that executive functioning. Because if you feel like you can't rely on yourself to run your life, then it's really hard to get into new healthy habits and pursue your goals. So we talk about setting up routines, using watches and phones to remind you to do things you need to do, and develop systems that become automatic. So you don't have to think things through all the time and putting in all that cognitive energy and effort to do so. I'll talk more about this in the case examples. Important habits to set up are sleep. Sleep is the foundation for mental health. Sleep helps with focus. Sleep helps with mood. So if you're not sleeping well, that's your starting point. You really want to make sure that you're getting your sleep under control. You might need to speak to your doctor about that as well. Exercise boosts your mood, boosts focus. Again, I always try to recommend that my clients exercise every day, even if it's just going for a walk. Sometimes it's the only way that they're leaving the house. And then the only thing they're getting a sense of accomplishment over. Healthy eating, these are all sort of basic standard things, but they really apply to autistic people because it's hard to set up these routines, especially if they're so used to doing things a certain way. So healthy eating would be brainstorming about the types of healthy foods they would be willing to eat, meal planning, grocery shopping lists, planning about going grocery shopping, getting comfortable being in a grocery store. I mean, this healthy eating could take months to actually enact, but it's very important to break it down step by step. Implementing downtime into a person's schedules. For some people, it's 1 hour of activity equals 1 hour of downtime. That might not be the same for you, but you should be aware of what your ratios are and what you need. And making sure you're having creative outlets in your life. So self-care is about creativity. It's about pursuing passions, especially if you're a very busy person and you have to take care of yourself. Maybe you have children or a highly demanding job and you have a pet, and it's almost like taking care of you is on the back burner. You forget that it's something you need to do. We have to bring it back into focus and try to realign yourself with making good choices about who you want in your life, what kind of environments are healthy and good for your sensory processing that make you feel good. Accepting help can be really difficult, but realizing that you need help and even giving help can be very restorative. I know with our support groups that we run, the women who run the groups just find they get so much value and reward by giving back to the autistic community. And being accepting and loving yourself. Strengthening connections is something that we often do in therapy. We'll try to figure out who in your life is already there that's a really positive source that you want to reconnect with. Find people with common interests and common values. We can practice scripts of what you want to say. We can do role play together. I've done texting back and forth in real time with clients in my office to teach them how to respond to messages and not just let them sit, and how to be vulnerable with other people to actually let them in to strengthen that bond. And it's good to find a support network as well. This one takes a lot of practice, and it's asserting your needs, actually recognizing what do I need and how do I get there and who do I ask for it. And this is a very uncomfortable thing for autistic people to do because oftentimes they really don't want to be a burden, they don't want to take up space, and they want to please others. So getting to a point where they can do this is highly important for their mental health and to ensure that they're in healthy relationships and taking care of themselves. Setting parameters on energy. So recognizing that, as we said before, if you're waking up and you're tired and maybe you have a headache and you're already feeling a bit depleted, what can you actually manage in a day? Being very realistic about energy management. Some people use the spoon theory as a way to think about it, but being very mindful and intentional about how you spend your energy and how you can restore your energy. And when things do reach a breaking point, if a meltdown does happen, what can help? Distraction, so taking your mind away from the situation through music or visual, going to your happy place. Some people find intense sensations helpful, especially those who self-harm. So instead of reaching for that razor, they're going to reach for ice. And that feeling of ice or running their hands under freezing cold water or taking a freezing cold shower will kind of shock their system out of that need to hurt themselves. Deep breathing and meditation is great if you can do deep breathing exercises with your classroom or with your clients when they're feeling calm, so that they know how to implement it when they're feeling stressed. Grounding exercises, feeling like you have your feet on the ground. These can involve a lot of the different sensations in the body to try to relax. Animals are hugely helpful for autistic people, whether it's a guide dog or just a pet who is there for them when they need them. And trying to find some sensory deprivation. I know clients that I work with, at the end of the day, they'll go in their room, they'll turn off the lights, they'll lie under their weighted blanket, and they'll just maybe even put in their earplugs, and they just take away all the sensory input to allow their body to process. And some encouragement that things will be okay. So through identifying emotions, which we'll talk about in the case study, and living a life that's consistent with values, knowing what your triggers are, and creating a proactive plan with loved ones about what to do if a meltdown or a shutdown does ensue, can help to prevent meltdowns. How am I doing with time? Okay. The T in INVEST stands for thrive. So now they've built self-awareness. They understand, why am I doing the things I do? How can I create habits and routines that can protect my energy? How can I find people that I can be myself with, that I can relax with, who can offer support that I can support? Environments that fit their needs. Then the individual can learn to thrive. We really want to focus on clarifying their purpose. What do I want and need in the different avenues of their life? Whether it's relationships, the environment, work, or leisure. And sometimes this involves making really drastic decisions. Realizing that the environments you're in, the relationships you're in, even family members might be toxic to you, and that things need to change. And as the clinician, it's supporting that individual to, if they come to those realizations, to make some changes, to figure out how to get themselves out of situations they've been in for a very long time that they've felt stuck in. Making positive choices now while they understand their values, they understand what's important to them. They can cope more effectively with the distress that might be coming at them or with the sensory overload. They can anticipate what kinds of situations might increase my stress or increase my anxiety, and they can move through life at a pace that is good for them. I want to really stress this, that our pace of life, our neurotypical pace of life is often not the right pace of life for an autistic person, because there's too much information processing, sensory processing, emotional processing, and often the people I work with become self-employed because they realize that it's very difficult to work within organizations or systems that can't support their needs, and so they carve out their own niche and they become their own boss. Disclosure is a big one. As a child, you often lose control over who knows whether you're autistic or not. It could be on your IEP, the Individualized Education Plan in Ontario. I'm not sure what the equivalent is there. But when young adults and adults are getting their diagnosis, this is a piece of information they can choose to do what they want to with it. And it's a very important decision because once that decision is made, they do lose control over what happens to it. So there are definitely benefits to disclosure, and you would want to talk to the person you're supporting about what they are. Someone can understand you better. You can have a more authentic relationship. You can be closer. If it's a workplace, they might be able to provide you accommodations and supports that help you be more effective in your job. But there are risks as well. Usually, especially when a woman says that they're autistic, their response is, no, you're not. How could you be autistic? That's not possible. Right? So a lot of that invalidation, it's a knee-jerk reaction. That doesn't mean that this person is going to forever be a person that you can't talk about your diagnosis with. With some education, they may understand it better. So you have to understand that there are risks that the person that you share this information to might not react in the way that you're hoping. You want to think about how you tell others. For instance, do you want to broadcast it across Twitter and suddenly become like a neurodivergent advocate? Or do you want to just more keep it to yourself and just tell your partner and maybe some of your close friends? So you really want to think of the scope of your sharing. And it'll be interesting to hear tomorrow from our panelists about their choices, because they've obviously all decided that it was important for them to disclose their diagnosis. And we appreciate that they're going to be here to share about their experiences, and we can benefit from that. It's also good to find the right time to share. Just make sure that you know that you have some quiet, that there's privacy, that you can talk to that person when you feel calm and grounded. And yeah. Healthy relationships are a key part of thriving. I'm putting up 2 of our groups here that support autistic women. And I know we have a group through CAN, Canucks Autism Services, that has just been developed to support autistic women that we have been a part of and mentoring, which has been a great experience. So being able to meet other autistic girls and women is hugely important. It creates a sense of belonging, a sense of common experience. Before we started our Good Company group, a lot of the women that I was meeting with had never met another autistic woman before. And they almost felt like a pariah or like a unicorn, like there's just no one else like them out there. They felt very isolated. So meeting other autistic women in person and seeing that, oh, they're just like me, or oh, they're not quite like me, but we have some shared experiences, has been very, very important for them and for their identity. And several of the people I've worked with have ended up becoming autism advocates and helping other autistic people and supporting other autistic people. And I kind of feel like that's when I really have achieved something, when someone gets to the point where they have so much pride in who they are that they want to be able to help others with that. Healthy relationships is also about setting boundaries. As I mentioned before, autistic women can end up in a lot of unhealthy relationships. So being able to say to someone, you know, I like you, but I need to go slow, or not right now, or let's take a break, or I'm not ready. You know, all these phrases are very important in romantic relationships. And then finding friendships with people who they really care about. And maybe that's a friend who they talk to once every 6 months. It doesn't have to be on a certain set of rules in terms of how often they connect, but people who really value them. And thrive is living a meaningful life on your terms as an autistic woman, or as on their terms as an autistic individual. There's a sense of self-awareness and self-acceptance. It's not just knowing who you are, but really accepting and loving who you are, valuing who you are, understanding the differences. Authentic living with unmasking, so finding people that you can be yourself with, where you don't have to pretend. You can feel okay stimming with, or just interacting naturally with. You don't have to modify yourself in their presence. And being able to unmask at home as well. Maybe it's about putting on your favorite song and being able to just, you know, dance and let it all out. A sense of connection and belonging with other people is part of Thrive, so suddenly you're a part of a community. You're not just alone. And I think this takes that sense of belonging to that whole other level. It's not just you've accepted yourself, but you're having other people accepting you too and supporting you. And it leads to a sense of hope and possibility, which is so important, because a lot of people, when I meet them, they just feel desperate, they feel alone, they feel like they can't make changes in their lives. And through this INVEST counseling process, they end up having a sense of hope, and they see positive changes that take place. So thank you very much. That's the invest for today. And then this afternoon, I'm going to talk about some case examples where we're going to bring some of the invest model to life.